Okay. Everybody wants to do this, but
Howdy.
hi, Joe.
Hi. Hi.
Linda.
Hi, Linda. You got long hair.
I have,
Yeah.
Who are we? We are Jane's Book Club, or the members who are here, Joy Markowitz, Andrea Weiss, Carolyn Heinrich, and Linda Oliver, and myself. How are we going to do this? Well, we were holding her yarn, remembering Jane as we talk, and then we want to just share a few reflections, and I'm going to have the rest of them give a little bit of memory as well.
I'm very happy to be here and to be able to be part of this. I wrote a note for Joe and Mary and Anna, and I'm going to read it to you now. Many months later, my heart is still heavy from the loss of Jane. She had such an indomitable spirit, such a get involved and make things better stance, such a twinkle in her eye, such a sense of adventure. Jane had presence. Jane was a breath of fresh air to our mother-daughter book club, bringing not only wonderful Mary, but also an openness to new categories of books. I'm so glad she joined us and stayed with us all those years. There were many things I learned from Jane. She was a font of interesting information. But the thing I hope I learned from her was a way of being. We all knew that Jane struggled with a variety of challenging health conditions, as she shared those with us. But because her health problems never seemed to stop her from pursuing new hobbies and interests, or from laughing and smiling, they did not ever define who she was or how I thought about her. How she lived her life was truly an inspiration and gift to all of us. It feels good to know that Jane's name will have an ongoing life in Tacoma Park in the form of a plaque on what I will from now on think of as Jane's Bench. Love, Andrea.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Joy Markowitz, also one of the book club members, but I'm reflecting on another experience I had with Jane. So in February 2019, I went to see an advertised presentation that piqued my curiosity, although I knew nothing about it. It was Female Reenactors of Distinction, or FREED, F-R-E-E-D. These women dress in period clothing to portray women of the Civil War era. Their purpose is to educate the public through dramatic readings and other educational programs. FREED has been in existence since 2005 and is an auxiliary organization of the African American Civil War Museum. So that day in 2019, I sat in the back of a crowded room in Silver Spring and watched this very interesting historical program. And at some point I realized that there was a head of hair in the front of the room that looked very familiar. And of course, I think you're all shaking your head. She had a very unique head of hair. And this woman was sitting with her back to me, but I knew immediately it was Jane, even before her head turned. So after the program is over, Jane moved from performer to performer, talking in her animated way, okay? I waited for her as the audience cleared out, and Jane then told me that day, and several times in the weeks to come, that she was trying to identify a white woman from the Civil War period that she could portray, someone that she and the other reenactors thought would complement and enhance the current group of women portrayed. Then she would do research and create a script and find period clothing. Isn't this classic Jane? Okay, and she had such excitement in her voice. Now I actually don't know if if Jane ever became a reenactor. Maybe Joe can enlighten us later. But I picked this memory because it's so clear in my mind and because it depicts Jane so well. She had an enthusiasm for life and found ways to jump in and use her talents and interests to educate and entertain others. She had an intellectual curiosity and that was contagious. And she was so optimistic, as others have said, about everything. In this case, she wanted to use lessons of history to make the world a better place. I can close my eyes and I can imagine Jane on stage with the female reenactors of distinction. Excuse me.
This is so hard. In addition to our wonderful book group gatherings over the past 17 years, I have many fond memories of Jane. Though our daughters Sarah and Mary have been good friends since elementary school, my first vivid memory of Jane was the day that our daughters both found out that they had gotten into college. So on impulse, the four of us decided to go out to dinner at Benihana's in Bethesda to celebrate. And it was a really joyous and laughter-filled evening. And I decided right then that Jane and I needed to be good friends. We just needed to become friends. She was just this radiant spirit that I had to get to know. So we became good friends and have been for many years, both in book group and otherwise. One of the most special things about Jane is that she married me and my husband, Nick, almost 7 years ago. And she helped us write a really beautiful ceremony that combined our very different religious traditions and helped us through that process. And she also brought immeasurable joy and love and spirituality to the ceremony. Anyone who was there can attest to that with her beautiful rainbow scarf around her neck. Jane's love of life was contagious. In addition to her obvious devotion to Joe and Mary and Anna and Keel, she shared with us her many, many passions: teaching, books, music, knitting, her dog, Martha's Vineyard, and also a really wonderful passion for justice and for peace. All of that was so contagious. Jane's bright light shone on everyone she knew. We'll really miss her.
I remember the first moment I met Joe, and
She brought these, she knew.
I knew. So you all don't have to cry if I am, okay? But anyways, Joe and Jane and Kenny and I met in birth education class.
Birth education.
Can you hear me? In the summer of 1984. And immediately across the room, we were both in like Birkenstocks and clogs, and the other people were like lawyers. No offense to the lawyers here, but they were like in silk maternity dresses, and we were in cotton muumuus. But it was like an I thou thing right away. And so almost immediately, because both our kids were born at the end of August, and since Mary is not here, I can actually say, because she always told me not to say this.
Sorry, Mary.
Get the shit out of here. You can edit that out, whoever you are. We saw Mary get her first bath because I was in for a test before Tim was born, and I saw Joe in the hallway, and I went, why is Joe here? Here we've been doing all this preparation for these new babies. And it was like, oh my God. So we got to see Mary in the nursery while she was getting her bath. That's how long ago. And so we just hung out a lot together over, especially those first years. And Jane figured out on New Year's Eve, because we were all so exhausted with new babies, that we should set the clock ahead. I think we started only with 4 hours. And that worked for a few years, but then Anna and Ben, my son Ben, came along, who were about the same age. I knew that would happen, but I had to wear it for Jane. Where did it go? Oh, thank you. I got to put it on anyways.
We have some tape.
And, but unfortunately, Tim and Mary got old enough to tell time, so we had to stop that. and we kept going from, 4 to 3 to 2 to 1 till we had to be in the real time. But we had such great times. And some of you met Jane. We all met together because we were all birthing at the same time, and even our second kids are the same age. Let's see here. I'm trying to skip over because all the book, especially the justice business, and I think I learned as much about the history of slavery and the depth of its evilness from Jane as from any history books, because it was that kind of justice, whether it was old or new or pending, that was such a passion for her. And it came out in her music. The other thing was, I'm more of a fiber quilting person. She was more of a yarn person. I lost my yarn too. You can see I'm flustered. But we used to go to the Maryland Sheep and Wool Festival together, which is where a lot of the 75 boxes of yarn came from. And Kenny and Joe used to wonder whoever died first, would the other one get all of their craft stuff? Luckily, I wasn't able to go get it, which was another thing. When we were, that first year we were pregnant, we made our appointments down at GW at the same time that summer. And we were both rather big girls and mature prima gravidas. And I mean, we were both really big. I don't know, some of you may have known her then too. And I almost have to demonstrate it, but we would walk across Washington Circle. And one time a cabbie stopped by the road and just looked at us. And another morning we went over to a cafe, and it was 11 o'clock and the cook didn't want to cook breakfast, he wanted lunch. So Jane asked the waitress, ask the cook, wouldn't he make an exception for us? And he said, as long as neither of you deliver in here. He didn't serve it up. We've mentioned the other groups that she was involved with. For a long time, she was involved with one of the Native American groups. And so you would always learn, that's part of the teaching piece of that, where she didn't just do it and learn it, but she shared it and added on to it. It was really spectacular, yes. And that personalization, the same with disabilities in general and people who are deaf and hard of hearing on top of that. And we used to come here so many times for lunches here or carry them over to our house. I didn't bring my cane today, but we had colorful canes, and we'd kind of like, which cane shall we carry today? I better stop. Oh, I know, I have one other story, another health one. We tended, between babies and other health issues, being on a cycle where we had new babies together, and we had kind of different malfunctions in our families. So we agreed to be each other's family because our mothers and mothers-in-law were not quite there, let's put it that way. So we pretended to be mothers to each other too, and that's one reason why I miss her. But
Would anybody be her mother?
well, I'm an old lady now, but I bet I can find some of you. I have one other story if I can find it here. Oh, so on one of my surgeries, I was at Georgetown Hospital, and there were some complications. And first of all, Jane had taken me to the hospital because I knew I'd be very relaxed. And she so put me into a meditative state that one of the doctors asked her to wake me up in the prep stuff because she was so good at meditating, calmness, you know, just what you needed when you're going into something like that. And later on, she came and visited me, and she was doing hands-on healing. And around the corner came a doctor and a flock of residents or medical students. And they were shocked because here was a woman, you know, holding her hands on this patient's body. And Jane said, oh, no, come in. I'm doing hands-on healing. and you do the traditional stuff, and we need both. But they flirted off because they were just so nonplussed that, you know, two mature women would be doing something in the hospital, I guess. Not that I felt like it. But later on, one of the resident students came back and said, tell me more about this hands-on healing. And I just remember how she talked about that need for both, I'm going to call it the real world. Crystal isn't quite the right word, but sort of the crystal lady part of life and the hands-on healing. And last year, we'd kind of rejoined our friendship again after a slight falling out, which was the only one we ever had and was my fault anyways. And we had agreed that we were going to recuperate again together because we both got flummoxed by the quarantine and everything. And I still miss her. I've got a lot of healing more to do because she isn't here. So here's to Jane, and she loved purple. And we all miss her.
Thank you. When I think of her hands. The first hand is communications. Sure. She used her hands to connect with all people. She signed difficult concepts. At Gallaudet, I cannot understand how you can talk about religion in sign language. I just can't, you know. I can't talk about it in words. So that's pretty amazing. She picked up the phone and called you or texted you a lot, thought about you. She typed her thoughts on her blog. I don't know how far she got with that, but she was excited about starting it when she advocated for everything that was important to her, as we've all talked about. And then the second hand I see falls under creativity. She used her hands to create such beautiful things, knitted items, and often for one of us or our kids or a baby, a personal touch and color and style to wrap you in love. You know, she was just that way. She used her hands to strum new and old tunes and express things she cared most about. The third hand I think about is caring. I'm trying to stick with the C words. She volunteered in hospice. Not a lot of people can do that, but like you were saying, she worked with her hands, and I think she had one foot on the other side anyway. She had her feet on both sides, and she could help at hospice and hold their hands and just be and console the families like she consoled many of us different times. The fourth hand, concern. She was the first one to protest and fight for equal rights for all. When she passed away, and then soon after we had the George Floyd stuff, we all said, we got to go out there and do this for Jane, put up a sign, you know, express Jane. She was there all the way. She used her hands to carry out her purpose of proclaiming love to all of those around her. So I just say, let's think of her as we use our own hands to communicate, create, care, and be concerned for others. And by doing that, I hope we can honor her memory and her whole experience with us. Carry forward Jane with us. So I think if no one else has anything to say, we want to share a little bubbly and toast. And we want to re-express the family's chosen epitaph, which I think is spot on Jane. All you need is love. And I can hear her singing it.